Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Here's where we are. With the holidays looming, Republicans created a massive government crisis out of nothing. They then begged Democrats to bail them out, which the Democrats did tonight, and a costly shutdown appears to be averted at the 11th hour. With the passage of a bill to fund the government until March in the House, thanks to near unanimous support from Democrats just hours before the federal government was set to run out of funding. We're still waiting on the Senate, though that's expected. This absurd flirtation with disaster was completely preventable, but it became necessary after Republican leadership scuttled a robust bipartisan funding bill that had been hammered out between the parties over months. They got orders to oppose it from the big guy, the wealthy showman who is the de facto leader of the Republican Party, Elon Musk. The world's richest man who used his Twitter platform to blast the government funding bill dozens of times. After Musk declared war on the bill, then the actual president-elect, that guy named Donald Trump, followed suit, saying, yeah, also I don't like it. And he wanted the funding bill to also do away with the federal debt ceiling. Okay? What then unfolded over the last 36 hours was predictable chaos, you could call it. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson suddenly struggling to keep the government open and keep his own leadership job, while the world's richest man tweeted about how a government shutdown wouldn't be that bad. In fact, it would be good. An absurd situation that Democrats hammered in floor debates tonight.
At the behest of the world's richest man, who no one voted for, the United States Congress has been thrown into pandemonium. It leads you to the question of who is in charge? I thought that there was a Republican majority in this body, not a President Musk majority.
Still, given the last-minute nature of the bill and the need for suspension of the rules, a two-thirds vote, Democrats swooped in to vote for the bill that passed tonight. It was in some ways very similar to the original bill that Musk killed. So it keeps the government open until mid-March. It keeps the disaster aid and emergency relief for farmers flowing, which were aspects of the bill. But crucially, and we're going to get into this tonight, it did not and does not include the original bill's $190 million for pediatric cancer research. Notably, it also did not include what Trump said he wanted most, what he called for, what he said he would support primaries over an end to the debt ceiling. But the bill and Speaker Johnson got the seal of approval from the guy who really pulls the strings. Quote, "The Speaker did a good job here given the circumstances. It went from a bill that weighed pounds to a bill that weighed ounces." We all know, of course, that the weight of a bill is the most important part of it. And what were those circumstances, Elon? The conditions you caused? Even so, after the vote, Speaker Johnson assured reporters that both of his bosses were pleased with the outcome.
I was in constant contact with President Trump throughout this process, spoke with him most recently about 45 minutes ago. He knew exactly what we were doing and why, and this is a good outcome for the country. I think he certainly is happy about this outcome as well. Elon Musk and I talked within about an hour ago, and we talked about the extraordinary challenges of this job. And I said, hey, you want to be Speaker of the House? I don't know. He said, this may be the hardest job in the world. I think it is. But we're going to get through this.
I talked to Trump. I talked to Musk. At one level, it's just the latest and starkest reminder Republicans have not been capable of smoothly governing for years. It's exactly what they've been doing during this Congress, the most dysfunctional Congress basically in anyone's memory. It's the one that you remember started in January 2023 with the longest, most contentious vote for a House Speaker since the lead up to the Civil War. It took 4 days and 15 rounds of voting for Kevin McCarthy to realize his life dream of becoming Speaker, and then he only lasted a few months before being ousted by a handful of his own colleagues. It was led by now former Congressman Matt Gaetz. We're awaiting the release of his possible ethics report about allegations of sexual impropriety. Anyway, something McCarthy says wasn't about policy disagreements, but something else altogether.
And I'll give you the truth why I'm not Speaker. It's because one person, a member of Congress, wanted me to stop an ethics complaint because he slept with a 17-year-old. An ethics complaint that started before I ever became Speaker, and that's illegal, and I'm not going to get in the middle.
This is still that Republican Party. This shutdown mess is part and parcel of their signature incompetence. Now, there is one new twist. Where House Republicans used to take their marching orders directly from Donald Trump, this version of Trump is now 78 years old. He's entering office as the oldest man ever to enter the office in history. He seems less energetic than ever. And there appears to be a new, more powerful party boss in town in the form of the world's richest man, who's decades younger, owns an influential platform, the unelected co-president Elon Musk. Now, this is a guy who clearly has very little understanding of how Congress and the Constitution work. But whatever Musk is up to, it is only possible because of the Republican Party's longstanding incompetence, infighting, self-involvement, inability to articulate a cohesive vision of the public good. Throughout the campaign this year, their incompetence was papered over, forgotten, didn't really punch through. And there was this gathering idea that MAGA politicians had learned that they'd gotten smarter and more sophisticated. They had a playbook for governing this time. They had Project 2025. And a big part of that is true. It continues to be really ominous that this new administration has developed in these 4 years what seem to be pretty detailed plans for mass deportations, using the tools of law enforcement against political rivals and opponents. But over this last few days is the first test of their competence right here. And it doesn't look like these people spent a lot of time practicing and getting their reps in so that they could be game ready when they came back off the bench. Sahil Kapoor is a senior national reporter for NBC News, and he joins us live from Capitol Hill. In the end, Sahil, it seems to me like the ultimate thing that always brings these to a resolution, which is that everyone wants to get out of town for the holidays, was what ended things here.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of it, Chris. It was quite a turnaround over just 2 days from President-elect Trump and Elon Musk blowing up that earlier deal to the House of Representatives, ultimately passing a slimmed-down version of it. And it's very notable that the House passage of the bill only came after Speaker Johnson went through several iterations. Finally, on Plan D, he agreed to strip out the single biggest demand that Donald Trump has made, kind of at the 11th hour, this curveball that he threw, saying that he wanted this Congress to get the debt limit off his plate so he could come into office and pursue his agenda, including major tax cuts. Democrats said no way they were going to do that. They saw that as them kind of rolling out the red carpet, just as he wants to pass a big tax cut that they argue will primarily benefit the wealthy. But in the end, you know, Trump threatened to primary what he said any Republican who voted for a bill without a debt limit extension, and 170 Republicans voted for it. One of the takeaways there is that Republicans have an easier time saying no to Trump when they do collective action. You know, when it's not just a few of them that he can go after individually and target them. When it's 170 of them, he's not going to come after them and primary them. Now, Chris, this also creates a massive legislative traffic jam in the early part of Donald Trump's presidency next year. They have pushed the deadline to March 14th. That means they're going to have to come right back to the table, cut another deal with Democrats, because they can't pass a bill like this without Democrats even next year, when they have full control of Congress. There's also the debt limit deadline that they have to deal with now next year. It's not dealt with in this one. Major party line bills on immigration, energy, and tax cuts that Republicans are trying to pursue, in addition to confirming President Trump's cabinet nominees and personnel through the Senate. That is a lot to do. And this wafer-thin Republican margin in the House, the first thing they've got to do is elect a speaker. Mike Johnson is going to run for re-election. He expects to become speaker again. But when they take office, when they take their seats, Chris, on January 3rd, the margin is going to be 219 to 215 because Matt Gaetz is not going to take his seat. That means Speaker Johnson can lose one Republican, just one. A second defection could prevent him from getting the speaker's job and throw the entire Republican agenda into disarray. So that's where they are now. He's got 2 weeks to make sure he can get the votes and kick off what is likely to be, even in the best case scenario, a very, very rocky next year for President-elect Trump's agenda.
Yeah, you made this point, which is great, that on Wednesday, Trump threatened to primary any Republican who votes for a clean continuing resolution without a debt limit extension. That was his threat. His demand was, I don't know what Elon's doing. He's doing his thing. But my demand is you do the debt ceiling. Bupkis. It lost the vote on the debt ceiling at 38 defections, and then this passes today with 170 votes. As you say, Friday, 170 Republicans vote for a clean continuing resolution without a debt limit extension. The bill passed overwhelmingly. Whereas the spending Musk was focused on did get cut out. It seems like one of them got what they wanted and one didn't. Sahil Kapoor, thank you, and I'm glad that you can also go home for the holidays.
And we begin tonight with the government funding nightmare before Christmas, which may just have been averted, all thanks to the Democrats. Just hours before the government was set to shut down at midnight, the House finally passed a spending bill with 366 voting yes and 34 no votes, all of which came from Republicans. This bill was the Republican majority's Plan C, since the original bipartisan deal was tanked by Elon Musk and his junior partner, Donald Trump. And then the backup plan that Trump endorsed went down in flames with 38 of his own Republicans voting against it. What this new plan includes is basic government funding until mid-March, plus disaster relief and assistance for farmers. Basically, what they attempted to pass yesterday minus the debt limit extension, which, by the way, is what Trump, their supposed leader, was demanding. But we're not totally out of the woods just yet. This bill still needs to go through the Senate, which in the current Congress is still controlled by the Democrats. And only then would it go to the White House for a signature from President Biden. As everybody, House and Senate and White House are literally on the brink of leaving town for the holidays. But this is certainly a good sign for the millions of federal workers, from U.S. troops to TSA agents, who, if the government did shut down, would either be furloughed or forced to work without pay just days before the holidays. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Surkin. Julie, Plan C, give us the backgrounder on how it finally got to the floor to be able to be passed, mainly by Democrats.
You know, Joy, I'd go as far as to say this was actually Plan D, because 7 hours ago, when House Republicans huddled behind closed doors, the idea was actually to have 3 separate votes on all of these pieces. Ultimately, they decided that they need Democrats to get any of this across the finish line anyway, so they bundled it all together, put it as a package on the floor without that debt limit hike, literally an 11th hour ask from the president-elect, and they muscled it through. But I will tell you that yesterday you had 38 Republicans who voted against Plan B. Today you had 34 Republicans who voted against Plan C or D, whatever we're calling it, and you had this vote that essentially got over the finish line by Democrats who carried it, none of them voting against this bill, 194 of them or even more voting to keep the government open, to keep the lights on. Now this goes over to the Senate side, where the sleigh bells are fuming, everybody wants to get out of town. But the next question is certainly what happens to House Speaker Mike Johnson's future. He joked after the vote that he even brought up to Elon Musk, hey, buddy, do you want to be Speaker? And then Musk told him it seems like the hardest job in the world. I chased Johnson to his office and I asked him, do you even want this job, given how chaotic the last 36 hours have been without Trump even on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue? And he told me, look, being Speaker is a challenge in the modern era. Those were his words. He said that it's a great honor to serve in this position. He did say he wouldn't say it's the most fun job in the world, but he said that, yes, he's ready to be Speaker again and that everybody's going to rest over the holiday break and they're going to come back in January prepared to do the hardest work of their lives, and it will be the hardest work of their lives.
He says that he still wants a job, and I apologize to the audience for all the noise. It sounds like lots of people are chatting around you, Julie, but what are the signs that he can be Speaker? It's really not up to him, is it?
It's not. And again, you had 34 Republicans who voted against this plan, one that Trump seemingly endorsed, or at least didn't stand in the way of. But certainly because of this whole debacle, remember this bill went from nearly 1,600 pages to now under 200 pages, and everything that happened in the last 36 hours, a lot of people are pointing fingers, and they only have one person they can point that finger on it and blame successfully, and that is Speaker Mike Johnson. However, if Trump still backs him, which it sounds like he does, if Musk backs him and won't send the ex-warriors to come after him, then certainly his job is safe, but that doesn't mean that House Republicans are happy with him. There are many, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, who said earlier today, still floating Vivek Ramaswamy or Elon Musk as Speaker. I don't think anyone else in this body wants the job. But again, you don't have to be a member of the House to be Speaker. By all accounts, though, Speaker Mike Johnson still wants that gavel.
What a world. What a time to be alive. NBC's Julie Surkin, thank you, and thank you for putting up with all the noise around you in order to get that information to us. Let's bring in Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington. Congresswoman, what a mess, I guess, is the sort of simple way to put it. From your read, as you're talking to your colleagues, both in the Democratic Party and Republican colleagues, who is actually in charge? Is it Elon Musk? Is it Donald Trump? Because it certainly doesn't seem to be Mike Johnson.
Well, look, Joy, first of all, I think it's Hakeem Jeffries who is the person that literally makes this happen, right? It is Hakeem Jeffries and Democrats who have bailed out Republicans again and again and again when they fracture, and they have embarrassing situations like they did on the floor yesterday, where they're in the majority. They put up a bill that contains that 11th hour demand from Donald Trump, and they can't even get a majority of votes for that bill. And so I think the question you're asking is really important, because as we go into a Republican trifecta, who is Mike Johnson actually negotiating with? Is it the president-elect Donald Trump, or is it the shadow president, Elon Musk? That's question number one. Question number two is, what happens when it is a Republican trifecta? Because Democrats will not. It's a different situation when you have divided government, because actually in this bill, there is so much good stuff that we were able to get in it. Childcare, housing investments, as well as the things that you mentioned. And so it's a little bit more complicated when you have a divided government where you are able to get some things in, but then there are other things that, that are harder to get in. In this case, we were able to get this ridiculous, crazy 11th hour demand out, and we were able to keep all the good things in. When it's a Republican trifecta, they will have to produce the votes, all of the votes, for anything they want to do. And we have seen over and over again, they can't keep government open. I'm not sure they can elect a speaker. We may have another 15 rounds of voting for a speaker. Who knows? But when you have 34, 38 Republicans who are splitting from you, that is a real problem. It shows you can't govern. It shows what a fractured coalition you have. And I think Democrats just have to really be steely spined as we go into this next term, and we have to really stick together and just say no to the things that they are going to do that are going to benefit Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, that's calling the shots for Republicans, and going to hurt working people and poor people across this country.
So one of the ways in which Republicans defy Donald Trump, 170 of them that voted for this bill, and again, it was 190 or more Democrats are the ones who really carried the bill, but the ones who did vote for it were defying Donald Trump. He wanted a debt limit increase in the bill. He wanted the debt ceiling to be done under President Biden, not under him. He did not get that. They completely defied him. But Mike Johnson made this sort of vague promise that they were going to give them $2.5 trillion in debt reduction. You really can't do that without cutting things like Social Security and Medicare and eating into things that are really actually important to Americans. What are Democrats thinking y'all are going to be facing in the minority in January in terms of what they want to cut?
Well, exactly right. They had to Donald Trump had to back down. He did not win this fight. Donald Trump and Elon Musk lost this fight to get us to suspend the debt ceiling so that they could pass Trump tax scam 2.0, right? And send all of this huge amounts of money, trillions of dollars, to the wealthiest 1% and screw everybody else who's actually going to end up paying for that bill. We said no to that. So as we go into the next year, we have to take a lesson from this. First of all, we should not back down from really fighting for working people and poor people. We cannot be in the position where we got to make up for their stuff. Number two, they have to stay and push all of this stuff through. Can't do it for them.
Yeah. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, thank you so much. Much appreciated. I appreciate your time. And joining me now is Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania. Charlie, thank you and welcome to the show. This is a conundrum. This is Sahil Kapoor, our really great congressional reporter. He says Wednesday, Trump threatens to primary any Republican who votes for a clean continuing resolution without a debt limit extension. Friday, 170 Republicans vote for a clean continuing resolution without a debt limit extension. The bill passes overwhelmingly. It does feel like Donald Trump has been sidelined to some extent by his funder, Elon Musk. Is that the way you see it?
Well, I certainly think that Elon Musk kneecapped Speaker Johnson with an assist from Donald Trump. And it seems to me that Elon Musk got out in front of Donald Trump on this whole continuing resolution compromise, which if I'm Donald Trump, I can't be too happy about. So I think that there's going to be an inevitable collision between these two very strong personalities. We can't have two people acting as commander-in-chief, essentially, at a time like this. And of course, Donald Trump, sorry about my light here. There you go. But so Donald Trump, here you go again. Donald Trump and Musk are bound for a collision course. I should say one other thing, too. We're in this whole mess to begin with, Joy, because, the Congress should have passed all 12 appropriations bills before Christmas. But it was the hardliners in the House Republican Conference and Donald Trump, who said, let's kick this all into the new year, to the middle of March. They got their way. And then 2 days ago, President Trump said, well, we need a debt ceiling increase. Well, they should have begun that conversation immediately after the election. And of course, the Democrats are never going to concede to that in the 11th hour because they're going to use it as leverage, just as the Republicans have. And by the way, when they use this as leverage, either side, they're taking a hostage that they will never shoot because no one will ever crash through the debt ceiling. That said, I mean, it was unreasonable to demand a debt ceiling increase in 24 hours.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling with whiplash right now because of all this back and forth. But the reality is there are not 218 House Republicans who will vote for a continuing resolution or a debt ceiling. So therefore, they need Democrats to vote for these bills that must become law.
She set up this illegal server knowing full well that her actions put our national security at risk. And it's everybody's deepest hope that justice, at last, will be beautifully delivered.
In 2016, Donald Trump relentlessly attacked Hillary Clinton over her use of a private email server to handle government business while she was Secretary of State. Fast forward 8 years, and now the president-elect has a private email issue of his own. According to Politico, Trump's transition team is conducting business through private emails, and federal officials are sounding the alarms. Federal officials say they're worried about sharing documents via email with Trump's transition team because the incoming officials are eschewing government devices, email addresses, and cybersecurity support, raising fears that they could potentially expose sensitive government data. The private emails have agency employees considering insisting on in-person meetings and document exchanges that they otherwise would have conducted electronically. Joining me now is Heath Brown, who's an associate professor of public policy at CUNY's John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He is also the author of Roadblock, Joe Biden's Rocky Transition to the Presidency. Heath, thank you for being here tonight, Professor. First, just talk to me about, you've written about the subject of presidential transitions, and in the context of that process, how much of a challenge is something like this?
It's a huge challenge. In 2020, it was one of the most important things that the Biden-Harris transition team worried about. They worried constantly about being hacked. The reason for that was 4 years earlier. The hacks undid the Clinton campaign in some ways. And so they thought about it all the time and worried about it a lot. That this incoming transition team isn't worrying about in the same way raises some major, major questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as if hacks aren't a major issue right now, right? There was Salt Typhoon, the Chinese hack of the American telecom system, which was maybe the most significant attack on American telecom ever, or even American information systems. There are the Iranian hacks of public officials, candidates, including Donald Trump and I believe Kamala Harris. I mean, from the perspective of foreign interference, how permeable, do you think it is for the Trump administration and the transition to be using private, Gmail accounts?
We don't know exactly what the risks are, but what we do know is that the federal government, specifically the General Services Administration, has been ready to help. They've been ready to help for a year and already organized and prepared the kinds of technology that would be helpful to deal with the cyber threats that the incoming administration is facing. That the incoming administration isn't availing themselves of that help raises major, major issues. Why wouldn't you accept the help of an agency that understands this issue, that is prepared for this issue, and is willing to provide you with that assistance? I think that's really important right now.
Do you have a theory? It is a pressing question, and it's coming as the Pentagon is, I think, issuing multiple reports into Elon Musk and whether he should have the top secret classified information access that he does because of his sort of undisclosed meetings with foreign leaders. How much are you connecting the dots there to the Trump transition team not wanting to use secure government servers for their correspondence?
Yeah, I think for a long time it's been clear that President-elect Trump has a deep, deep distrust and has a deep paranoia about what it might be made available related to the conversations that his transition team is having. I think this is the main reason why they've opted not to use the federal support. They're concerned that using The GSA email addresses will make that information subpoenaable should the cause arise. And I think they're trying to protect themselves because of how deeply distrustful they are of so much of the operations of the federal government. I think that's really the crux of the issue. I think that distrust isn't well-founded, but I think that is one of the hallmarks of this incoming administration.
And I would assume it also makes it difficult from the point of view of a Presidential Records Act, right? I mean, he's not president yet, but I would assume that his sort of digital hygiene doesn't necessarily get better when he's president, given Trump's track record of, you know, taking classified documents with him down to Mar-a-Lago, and, you know, Mark Meadows, as chief of staff, burning documents in the fireplace, Trump ripping up documents, sending them down the toilet, his staff having to tape back documents that he had torn into pieces. This is not someone who has a particular allegiance to the notion of keeping records for the archives, for history, for the American people. Do you see this as problematic in terms of the longer lens of history and understanding the machinations of the Trump administration in the future?
Yeah, right now this is a nonprofit organization that's running the transition, so they can make the decisions about what emails they use. It doesn't project very well into the post-January 20th administration. It suggests that they're not ready to trust and adhere to the law in the way that they should. All of those transparency rules that we have don't apply to the transition period. And so we know very little about what's going on right now, and we probably never will. We, for example, don't really know all of the people involved in this transition. The names haven't been made public in any kind of complete way. There are landing teams spread out across the government right now. We don't really know who they are, whether they're following the kinds of concerns about conflicts of interest and ethics that have always marked this time period. And so this does suggest some concerns for the future once the administration is up and running.
And just on a practical level, because government efficiency is such a hobby horse of the incoming Trump administration, you know better than I, but I would assume if you cannot look at any of the incoming information, classified or sensitive, digitally, if it cannot be emailed to you, and you literally, because you're not using, you know, the government services to keep that information secure, you have to go physically to a location and go to a secure room or do an in-person meeting. That would slow down a transition greatly, would it not?
No doubt. This is all about cooperation, and anything that's done to slow down cooperation is a concern. Related to that is the question of exactly how many people have received the security clearances necessary to even be briefed on these issues. The foot dragging on relying upon the FBI to do those security clearances, as it has in the past, makes me wonder whether enough people have the security clearances today to be read in on the major threats to the country. That's happened in the past. It's not clear exactly right now the extent to which it's happening. And that makes that information sharing on critical national security issues very, very difficult.
Professor Heath Brown of the City University of New York, it's great to have your perspective on this. Thanks for joining me on this Friday night.
Thank you.
Mariana Sotomayor is the congressional reporter for The Washington Post. Phil Rucker is national editor for The Post. And Mike Ricci is Republican strategist and former communications director for Speaker Paul Ryan. Great to have all of you here. Okay, Mariana, let's set the stage. How likely does it seem right now that Mike Johnson's speakership could be in trouble?
I mean, it is in trouble. This has been mounting for several days, even before Musk actually chimed in to really trash Johnson's initial proposal. There were already conversations happening among a number of Republicans, and it's not the usual hardliners who have been very critical of Johnson for a majority of this year. There are many Republicans from across the conference who have felt like Johnson has not handled this process well. He has not been communicating with them. And Johnson, in closed meetings, has been saying, well, I have been communicating with Trump. There's a lot that Johnson has to balance here. And that is making it harder for him to be able to tell his own House Republicans exactly what is going on at all times. The one thing that we all remember from then Kevin McCarthy's speakership was that Republicans do not like when promises are broken. And Johnson had said for a very long time that he would pass a clean extension of government funding, also add some disaster relief. But as we remember from earlier this week, he added so much more to his initial plan that it just evolved from there. And we're currently at a point where it's kind of plan, I don't know, XZ, a lot of moving parts today, but it seems like the plan now is to vote on the bill that failed last night, but without anything to do with the debt ceiling. That is obviously the debt. It's something that Trump has requested. So House Republicans are going to have to work through that as well.
Yeah, Mike, theoretically, look, Elon Musk is an option. You don't have to be a member of Congress, right, to be speaker. But before we get to that, do you see a path for Johnson to keep his job, or do you think that that ship sailed when 38 members of his caucus voted no last night?
Well, I think the thing to watch, Chris, is whether other names are floated to Trump in the coming days, whether people try to make some kind of secret pilgrimages to Mar-a-Lago to appeal to him. But this whole week, as Mariana mentioned, was about getting through this so that the speaker could be reelected on Friday the 3rd, and then Trump's electoral college win could be certified on Monday the 6th, and then get in through the transition. And now a lot of that's been thrown into disarray. So if you do try to replace him, you have to find somebody else, but you have to be able to do this on Friday the 3rd to move on with the business of government. So this may for now be one of those situations where he may not be the speaker you want, but he's the speaker you have.
Phil, your paper reports this on Elon Musk, and I'm quoting here. The tech billionaire's swift accumulation of political power has sparked criticism that the incoming Trump administration will function like an oligarchy, with Musk pushing for policies that will further enrich him and his companies. How much influence do you think Musk does have and will have in shaping this administration's priorities? And will it continue?
Yeah, Chris, it's an important question. The power that he has at this moment with the president-elect is extraordinary and perhaps without precedent for an unelected, business member to be this close to the president-elect, advising on so many of these personnel decisions in the assembly of the cabinet, weighing in on what sorts of policies are going to be front burner on day one, and then obviously with what happened this week, causing a real explosion in terms of the legislative activity on Capitol Hill within the House Republican Conference. That is a lot of power, and I think it's indicative of the kind of role that Elon Musk aspires to play come January 20th when Trump takes office. Now, one thing to just keep in mind is that Trump historically has always wanted to keep people a little bit off balance. He doesn't like when people in his orbit amass too much power or too much influence and tries to check them. We've not seen him do that yet with Musk. In fact, he seems sort of flattered that the world's richest man would want to be spending so much time with him and involved in this decision making. But there could possibly come a time where, Trump feels like Musk has too much power and he wants to try to put him in his place. And that's what I would look out for.
Well, he makes a good point, Mike. I mean, now some critics are calling Musk the shadow president. We know that Trump is not necessarily fond of people if they begin to outshine him. Do you think that this is a train wreck waiting to happen?
Yeah, I think, is this sort of the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end for that relationship? No question. But, one thing that came through in the reporting this week, and what I've heard from staff and members, is how frustrated they were with the misinformation that Elon was spreading on Twitter. And so it's interesting to watch Republicans and conservatives fight with each other about this. But that's one angle to watch here, is whether having Elon weigh in from the outside like this and creating this chaos, whether that begins to wear on people. And I do think the person to watch here, Chris, is actually J.D. Vance. He sort of sits uniquely at the axis of Trump, of Musk, of Don Jr., the Senate, the House. And so how he operates, him going to the speaker's office, him being on the president's statements, I think him as the power broker here is going to be one of the key angles here in terms of how members feel about these outside influences going forward.
Well, Mariana, he makes a good point. Are you hearing concern from members of Congress, specifically Republicans, about Elon Musk's power and influence and the potential of a billionaire to shape policy to his own financial benefit?
Absolutely. Even in the days after that President-elect Trump won the election, Republicans, especially those who lived through that first Republican trifecta in Washington, remember how Trump himself would pressure them to fall in line. So they were expecting that. The fact that we now have someone else who obviously has a very big platform who can just go and as we saw this week, ramp up a lot of the frustration that the far right flank of the House Republican conference, what Musk did was take that and amplify it. That seems to have gotten to Trump, which again led to this moment of breaking up this deal by Johnson initially, and now we find ourselves in this situation. Many Republicans pointing out that this is just a preview of what the next congressional term is going to look like.
Mariana Sotomayor, Phil Rucker, and Mike Ricci, thank you very much.